Okay, I just got the thumbs up, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So, hello, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. Really appreciate, it's Thursday afternoon after what has been kind of a marathon week, so I appreciate you hanging on till the end. My name is Cameron Stewart, and we are here to talk about reimagining software development and DevOps with Agentic AI. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So what we have on deck today is we're going to do a bit of a refresher of what DevOps is. It actually feels like it's been a few years since DevOps was like one of the hot new buzzwords. It feels like everything's agentic and LLMs these days. So just a quick refresher, trip down memory lane. And then we're going to talk about the tools and technology that we're using today, how we're empowering developers to move faster, to generate code faster. And then we're going to talk about the other tools that help support and make that all possible, that throughput. So that's what we have in store. Let's go ahead and dive in. I think I first want to start with what DevOps is not. So often people conflate DevOps with a tech stack, tools, right? DevOps is not tools, it's not YAML files, it's not pipelines. At its core, DevOps is an ethos, it's a philosophy. DevOps arose in response to dysfunction because we had disparate teams that had different incentives and KPIs. We had devs that were focusing on velocity and getting features out the door fast. We had ops that was responsible for reliability and making sure that things were available. We had security that was responsible for, keeping things secure. And then we had testing and quality and QA that was just responsible for quality and maintainability all up. But so these were all different teams that were using different tool sets, and everything was fragmented and siloed. And so that dysfunction, that bred dysfunction, and that dysfunction bred longer release times and broken feedback loops and slowed things down. And if we think about kind of the early literature of the DevOps movement, we think about books like The Phoenix Project and Lean Thinking. Those were really going back and relying on the principles of manufacturing. And if you think about a factory floor and how smoothly things need to run, a delay in any one specific step along that process causes a delay throughout the entire system. And so what it was focusing on was optimizing the system as a whole and not just focusing on a single component. And so it's applying those same principles to software development, to the SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle. We need to optimize the system as a whole. We need to give teams common tools, common practices, a better culture, so that there's not a culture of blame, that it's kind of shared collaboration, shared incentives. And so that's really what DevOps is. It's the union of people, process, and technology to continuously deliver value to end users. Because of course, technology did arise, right, to support these principles and this philosophy, like I said, to support this culture. You know, we did see things like CI/CD and IAC and GitOps like arise, but those weren't what DevOps was. They arose because DevOps demanded reliability, repeatability, faster iteration cycles. Those are the things that we needed, and so we had to come up with the technology to support these processes. Because you can still have pipelines and be deploying to code and using Kubernetes, and that's not DevOps if developers can't deploy frequently, if there's still committee or change by committee, and if there's still kind of broken cycles in there. That's not DevOps. So it's really the combination of the culture, the philosophy, and then of course there are technologies that come together to support and underpin all of that. And so I do want to address the elephant in the room. It feels like this topic is being brought up more and more these days. The first elephant in the room that I want to acknowledge is that Thomas Domka sadly is no longer the CEO of GitHub, so formerly known as CEO of GitHub. But one thing that Thomas always talked about was we will always need developers. Developers are going nowhere, even in this day and age where agentic AI and code generation tools are, or in the future, could be generating upwards of 90% of the code that developers are writing. It could be written by AI. But that 10% is still so important, and developers will stay in the loop. Developers are going nowhere. They're needed now more than ever. And that doesn't just apply to the human developers. That applies to the fundamentals, the little things, using small batch PRs, linters, code scanners, code review. None of that goes away. All of that becomes even more important in this day and age where we're generating code at such a fast clip. But in the kind of before times, even before generative AI tools were around, developers were only spending a fraction of their time writing code. There are still so many other concerns that they were focusing on in terms of debugging, testing, going to meetings, coordinating, making sure that the software was flowing through the system easily. Because again, if we go back to those manufacturing principles, that's what DevOps is all about. How can we allow maximum throughput? How can we allow software to flow through the system with minimal friction and obstacles along the way? That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day. And so going back to, developers were only spending a small part of their time actually coding, but there were all these other concerns that they were also having to focus on. And that even gets magnified in this day and age when they're able to offload kind of the writing of the code to these other tools. Because when we're generating so much code at, again, such a fast clip, there are so many other pillars of the SDLC that are still just as important. And if we don't have the processes in place to support all these other aspects of the SDLC, all of kind of this innovation that we can realize with AI is just going to become complexity very, very quickly. And so if we think about kind of the pipeline or the hose, if we're starting at the front end and just allowing developers to just generate code so fast and it's rocket fuel and they're innovating and they're pumping out features like never before, but the rest of your process isn't able to support that, that's going to become a bottleneck. And again, that's what the whole manufacturing principles and DevOps arose from, is to remove those bottlenecks because it'll stress the entire system. So we can't just focus on the beginning of the pipeline or really the kind of the middle of the pipeline. Let's just generate a bunch of code really fast. Now we have to think about the rest of the process. And so now I think we're really moving from, we're in the age of, yes, you can generate code very, very quickly, and there's a lot of it being generated at amazing speeds. But now the process that we need to focus on is verification and validation. Now we need to make sure that that code is secure, that it adheres and complies with governance standards, that it has all of the guardrails in place so that we can have an automatic flow through the system. Because if we think about it, when we kind of arrived in the AI era, that was like just being excited that we had a car. Now we have an F1 engine, but we need to make sure that we have everything else in place to support being able to go at this pace and at this speed. We need to make sure that we have brakes, steering, seatbelts. Come on, we have to make sure that we're going to stay safe. And so those are all the other concerns that now we have to kind of focus on now that we're able to go this fast. So let's talk about, if we think about kind of that front end of the pipeline, let's talk about the tools that are working, that are actually helping developers to generate this code. So if we think about kind of the evolution of generative AI and the tools that we're working with, you can think of it across a couple of different areas. We're going to look at the scope of changes, the frequency of the interaction, the inner versus the outer loop, and the developer canvas. And so, GitHub released Copilot in 2022, which is a year before ChatGPT came out, which is kind of crazy to think about. And it was so novel, right, to have code completions at your fingertips. Now you could just have your thought kind of finished for you, or you could have conversational chat where you didn't have to go to Stack Overflow or Google to answer your question. You just had it right there in your IDE. That was amazing. Really changed the game. And so what we were seeing was Copilot was really good at, again, that code completion was next few lines. And when we first released Copilot, we called it your AI pair programmer. And if anyone is familiar with kind of how pair programming works, it's that it's two developers, one keyboard, one monitor. You're both working on the problem together. It's super helpful to have that extra set of eyes there to be like, oh, that's a typo. Oh, here's the syntax for how you would want to finish that function. Copilot was that. It didn't have to be a human sitting next to you. Now you could catch your typos and finish your thought and tell you how to finish that function definition or what the next function needed to be. And so that was really helpful to have that, again, just kind of at your fingertips. And that experience needed to be really snappy, really fast. We wanted to happen in real time. It really was kind of finishing your thought as you were actively typing. And this was, again, focused on the inner loop. And this, largely, the surface that you were interacting with was your editor, whether that was VS Code or others, but you were working in your IDE. Then we kind of evolved to having conversational chat, being able to make edits across multiple files. Again, this experience still largely lived within the IDE, and is still focusing on the inner loop. And this maybe, though, kind of expanded the amount of time that it took because some of the reasoning was deeper. You were asking bigger questions. It took a little bit more cognitive load. And so this might now range on the order of magnitude of seconds to get a response to you in your IDE. Then we, really kind of change the game, and we get to where we're actually handing off entire tasks to agents. It's not just focusing on a specific, here's this block of code, I want to be able to do this again, can you do that for me? Now we're saying, hey, I have this new component I want to make, or I have this new feature I want to implement. Can you write that feature for me and create a new branch, push it to it, and create a PR in GitHub for me? And the agent can do that. And it's incredible what you can hand off to an agent. But of course, again, this is a little bit more computation that requires, and so now we're working in the order of magnitude of minutes, still focusing on the inner loop, and this was still living within the IDE. And of course, obviously, I work at GitHub, so I'm going to talk about Copilot a lot, but you can kind of insert your favorite tool here. We're not the only player in the game anymore. And there's lots of tools out there that can do this: code completions, conversational chat, agents that can work a little bit more autonomously. And so now, kind of the next evolution, and what I get really excited to talk about, is when we talk about things like coding agents. And so within the GitHub ecosystem, what this looks like is what we call Copilot coding agents. And what this does is that you can take an entire issue and you can hand it to the Copilot coding agent. And it'll parse the body of that issue, understand what it is you're trying, the work that you're describing, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and it will go to work. And you can assign whole tasks to Copilot, whether that's increasing test coverage, writing unit tests. I want to implement dark mode on my UI. You can do all kinds of things that you can hand off to the Copilot coding agent. And initially we started with GitHub issues because we're going to start within the ecosystem that we know and love, but we've continued to evolve where you can actually interact with and assign things to Copilot coding agent. So now you can do it from Azure DevOps boards, you can do it from Linear, coming soon you're going to be able to do it from Jira, you can even do it from Slack. It's pretty impactful to be able to hand an entire task off to Copilot coding agent, because what this does, this is completely asynchronous. You can assign Copilot coding agent 5 issues, and then you can go to a meeting, go to lunch, go pick up your kids, go to bed, whatever it is, go do whatever else you need to do. And then you can come back to 5 draft PRs. It's pretty incredible. And maybe Copilot doesn't get it 100% right 100% of the time, but when it does do it in one shot, you feel pretty powerful. You're like, I didn't even have to fix that bug. I didn't even have to look at that bug. Copilot knew what the description of the bug was able to parse the issue, generated the fix, ran tests to make sure everything was secure, and now we're good to go. So these are the types of tools that you can use that can help to automate this flow of software through the system. This is just one example. Again, we're kind of focusing on the beginning of the pipeline. This is helping developers generate code rapidly. And developers are getting a little bit more hands-off in this scenario, which we'll talk about more in just a bit. And so this really is kind of the shift that we're seeing. When we started with code completions and then conversational chat, but now we're really moving from assistants to agents. I mentioned that when we first released Copilot, we called it the AI pair programmer. Now what we're kind of referring it to with the rise of things like Copilot coding agent, it's your peer programmer. You can actually hand entire issues to it like it was a junior dev on your team. And so it's less a tool and more something that can act more autonomously. So we're helping to evolve from passive agents to more autonomous, or passive helpers, to autonomous agents. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I want to show you Copilot coding agent. So give me just a second here. We're going to switch on over. Okay, there we are. Welcome to GitHub. I have this repository, which is kind of like a logistics app. And I have a number of issues here of things that I can work on. So we can take a look at a couple of these, explore using a green color palette, page navigation and keyboard shortcuts, performance optimizations, add autocomplete suggestions for the search bar. We'll start with this good first issue, the navigating to the Help Center page doesn't redirect. So again, this is a GitHub issue, but it doesn't have to be. This can be a Linear ticket, this could be a Jira ticket, this can be, you can describe this from Slack. But we have the details in the issue here. The user should be redirected to the Help Center page when they select it from the bottom menu. And then we have a nice screenshot here, and that's all that's in the issue. So it's not all that verbose, but it is nice. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in terms of what we're trying to fix. The screenshot's super helpful. And so what I can do is I'm just gonna go ahead and assign this to Copilot. And so I can optionally add another prompt where this is targeting, which repository do you want to target? This is the one we're already working in, so I'm gonna stay there. We'll talk more about this later, but you also have the ability to assign it to other custom agents. We'll talk more about custom agents in a little bit, so I'm not going to touch that for now. I'm not really going to add anything. I think that the issue is good enough as is, and so I'm just going to go ahead and assign it. And so that's going to kick off this whole process. Now Copilot is an assignee. We'll watch it for just a second because you can see here that I assigned Copilot this. And what it's going to do is it's going to start a draft PR. And in this PR, it's going to say, hey, thanks for assigning this issue to me. I'm going to start working on it. I'll keep this PR's description up to date. It'll actually post back as it makes changes and kind of goes through it, does its thing. And it'll kind of, keep you updated there. Now, I wanted to kick this off because this will take maybe 10 minutes or so. We'll see, depending on conference Wi-Fi, So we'll come back to that. So we're gonna let that kind of cook for a bit. And in the meantime, let's go to VS Code and talk about some of the other ways and some of the other tools that developers have at their disposal in order to help them, generate code. And so again, I'm in VS Code. I'm gonna be working with Copilot. And so one thing that I have is, again, this is a logistics page, and you can also do like a shopping cart thing, or you can add items. You can add items to a shopping cart, but we don't actually have a shopping cart page at this time to display the items. So I want to have Copilot help me with that. So I'm going to say, can you help me create a shopping cart page and use I have a screenshot or an image of what I want it to look like as a reference. And so what I'm doing here, so a couple of things, because again, I just kind of kicked this off, this is gonna cook for a minute. One thing to call out, I'm working in agent mode. And so by the way, can everyone see this okay? Do you need me to bump up the font or anything? We're good? Okay. With VS Code, you have a couple of different modes that come out of the box. Initially, we started just with Ask, and then we added Edit, and then Agent, and then we recently made Plan available, because you also have the ability to create custom chat modes, and the custom chat mode that literally everyone was creating and putting in their repositories was a Plan mode, and so we were like, well, this just makes a lot of sense, and everyone wants to use this, so we're just gonna put this out of the box in VS Code. So you can kind of target which mode you're interacting with. I find that agent mode is probably the one that I'm working with the most, unless I'm specifically working on a plan where I'm not trying to generate any code. I'm just kind of in that ideation, brainstorming phase, and then I'll work on plan mode. But you can see that I also have another list, and these all correspond to other custom agents that I have defined within my repository. Now, how you do customizations with Copilot at the repo level is using the construct of this .github directory. And so within that directory, you can see that I have actions, agents, chat modes, instructions, models, prompts. We have a whole bunch of things in here. And so I have these custom agents which are defined. We can see API specialist, TDD green, TDD red. We have a couple of custom agents here. You'll notice that that then corresponds with the custom agents that I see here. So again, you can kind of target these custom agents if you have a specific task that you're working on. We'll go deeper into custom agents a little bit later, but I just wanted to call that out since you can see them there, and if you were wondering what those were. So if we go back to Copilot, we can see that a number of things have happened. So first, it's saying, let me examine the existing front-end structure to understand the current issue. You can see what it's using for reference. It's using a custom instructions file. You can see the files that it's reading to understand the repository structure and how the code base is functioning. It's going to check if there's a cart context already and look at the color theme. Now let me create a comprehensive shopping cart implementation. It's telling me what it's going to create. It's going to create a cart context to manage the cart cart state, cart page component. It's going to update the file to include the cart route, and it's going to update the products component to use the cart context. So it has a number of things. Again, it's going to kind of continue to work, but you can see here that I'm handing Copilot an entire task. Implement this functionality for me, and it's going to make changes across multiple files. Right now, we can see up here, it's already created and is working on those 2 files. So that's super helpful that it's kind of, again, working on that. Now, while Copilot agent mode is working, of course there's other things that I can be doing, but it really has kind of monopolized my IDE session for this particular task. I'm waiting for it to complete its output, and that's really what we're going to pop back over and we're going to check on how our coding agent is doing. Because what I love about handing off to the Copilot coding agent is that it really does feel like so much more of a handoff. I'm not quite as involved sitting next to it waiting for it to do its work. I'm just completely saying, hey, you go take care of this and I'll be back to check on you when you're done, honestly. But we can see that it has indeed kind of updated the body of the PR. Now it's created a plan and it's working. It created a list of steps that it's going to work through, and it's already done 2 of those. So same thing. I'm going to pop in to kind of check on the Copilot coding agent, what we call a session. So we have this button here that I can view session, and what this is going to do is this is going to take me into Copilot's session. And so we can kind of see from the beginning. First thing it does, it's going to check out the code. It's going to set up Node, and it's going to start both the GitHub and the Playwright MCP servers. Now, those ones are loaded by default, but you can also have your own MCP server definition if you want the coding agent to use a specific tool or to use a specific MCP server. You can configure that. So these are just the 2 that are on by default out of the box, but you can definitely add more customizes as your need kind of requires. So same thing, like Copilot takes kind of a very similar path with both of these. Is I'll start by exploring the repository structure, understand the code base, locate the relevant files for this navigation issue. It goes through those various files. Now let me explore the front end. Let me examine the footer component and the app routing structure. You can see the files it looks at for that. Now let me check to see if there's a help center component or if there's a page for that already created. Now let me check. It's going to look at our package JSON, and it's going to understand the build and test setup. It's going to look at the dependencies. All right, now I understand the issue. The help center link in the footer component is just using an href that doesn't navigate anywhere. So again, kind of our plan, what we need to do. So Copilot's making good progress here. We're going to update the footer to use React's router link. We're going to run the project. The build succeeded. Okay, so Copilot is still working here. But these are examples of kind of 2 different ways that you're interacting or you're having an agentic experience. One is in the IDE, and that's leveraging agent mode. And again, this is just Copilot specific, but there's other tools out there that give you the very similar agent experiences or agentic experiences. The other is by leveraging another tool, Copilot Coding Agent, that you can lob something off entirely to, delegate that responsibility to, and it'll just work in the background. The output, spoiler alert, is going to be that we're going to get a PR with all of this work completed for us to review. And so like I said, we'll see what it looks like and how good of a job it did. And maybe Copilot doesn't get it in one shot every time, but it at least gets you pretty far, maybe 80% of the way there, and that gets you a great place to at least now it's a good jumping off place, and you didn't have to start from there. So we're really empowering developers to move very, very quickly here. All right, let's pop over back to the PowerPoint while these things kind of finish and kind of continue to talk about Copilot Coding Agent, because now I do want to talk about it in kind of more of a real use case, because that's adorable little demo scenario that I have cooked up here, but let's talk about something a little more production grade. So internally, we at GitHub use GitHub to build GitHub. It turtles all the way down. Everyone at GitHub uses GitHub. Sales folks, marketing folks, everything lives in an issue. We track call logs and out-of-office requests and GitHub issues. That we use the platform for more things than it was designed, honestly. But this doesn't stop at just the platform itself. It also extends to the AI tools that we're also building. And so our internal teams use Copilot Coding Agent extensively. In fact, we used Coding Agent to help us build Coding Agent. And during that time, during March, you can kind of see here, it was one of the most productive members of the team. And so it was able to create new features, but it was also able to address tech debt, which is really, really incredible. Because like, as GitHub, we get an inane amount of feature requests. I know that you all can relate to this as well, but there is just an ever-growing backlog, and it feels like you're never really burning it down, especially with the really annoying, nitpicky stuff, like, that does represent just tech debt in general. It's the boring stuff. It's mundane. Developers don't want to work on it. They want to work on the shiny, new stuff. There's always pressure to get the new feature that's actually going to deliver business value out the door first. There's constantly this war between like tech debt, new feature, tech debt, new feature, and new features win every time. And so, this can kind of be a bit of a battle in terms of how do we address this. And I'll kind of end with this at the end of the talk about how we're handling this at GitHub, but I just think it's really incredible that we're using Copilot to do some of those boring things that developers don't want to do. And that's allowing us to burn down our backlog and to be more productive because we're able to offload this to Copilot. And so for the core GitHub repository, whoopsies, you can go in and see that Copilot Coding Agent is the #1 contributor to our core repository that builds github.com, which is pretty incredible because it's only been around for a couple of months. And right behind it in position #3 is the Copilot Code Review Agent. And so this is having a massive impact to us at GitHub. We're using these tools to really burn down our backlog and to really make commits. And I know this slide looks really pretty and looks like it's a marketing slide, so I just want to prove to you that this is true. And we're just going to pop over to what we affectionately call GitHub. This is the core GitHub repository. You're looking at it. And if I go to the Insights tab, and we wait for our contributions, you can see top committers is what we're calling Copilot SWE Agent, which was the internal code name for Copilot Code Agent when it first came out. And if I adjust this from 1 week to 1 month, like this is live actual data, you'll see that it does adjust. Here we have Copilot Code Review. So this is what Copilot looks like actually in the wild. Like we are using this internally at GitHub. All right, so now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the other pieces of the AI infrastructure that kind of support the other parts of the process. It's not just about developers writing code. So first, in terms of being able to realize the maximum value and to get the most out of these AI tools, especially these agentic tools, as we all know, context is absolutely everything. We first learned this with how we would rewrite our prompts. There was a lot of nuance that could go into what you were asking the tool to do. And if you could give examples, if you could give a specific format type or an output that you wanted to see, you would get better results. Now this has really widened. The scope of this has really widened from RAG and using other tools to pull in MCP, or using MCP to pull in other tools, to pull in context from other systems. I mean, really the name of the game is how to give the most appropriate and relevant context to the LLM for the particular task at hand that you're trying to handle. And one of the kind of best practices that we have landed on and that is widely adopted throughout the industry is custom instructions. And so this is your opportunity to tell Copilot and other tools how you want a particular task done. And what I think is really interesting and where some of this nuance is really starting to come into play is, you can use kind of like a top level, like we see here, again, using the .github directory, just a top level Copilot instructions file. You can definitely do that. But what becomes even more interesting is then if you start using instruction files that only apply to certain languages or frameworks. So if there is, whatever, for all of your CSS files, you want one set of custom instructions to apply to those files, but you want a different set of custom instruction files to apply to your playwright tests, for instance. You can use this construct, that middle construct, to only apply it to certain file types. And so this is really important because this not only is taken into consideration when you're working with Copilot in your IDE or when you're working with agent mode, but then when you start to do other agentic experiences like Copilot Coding Agent or Copilot Code Review, which we'll talk about shortly, it will look at these files and pick up on this and use this for context so that you can be very specific about how you do things within your organization. What are your coding standards? What are certain compliance guidelines? How does code need to be formatted? What does it need to look like? Especially when you're doing code review, custom instruction files are going to be your best friend, and I would highly, highly recommend that everybody use this with every repository. And then just in general, if you're just working with top-level agents, you can have different markdown files that guide that particular agent, again, on how you want it to behave. So there's lots of kind of customization here. I do want to show you what this looks like, so we'll pop back over to VS Code. I want to show you some instructions files. And so we have different instructions files for API instructions, and this is for guidance for editing and reviewing API code changes. You can tell it what it applies to. So again, just within these directories and these file types, you can give it kind of the review guidance, talk about your general API principles, make sure that it has a specific checklist that it is adhering to, so that anytime there are changes to any of these files that are listed here, again, if you're doing something like code review, these guidelines will be applied specifically to these file types. The other cool thing that you can put in the Matter Hatter description here is you can put if you want to exclude something. So there might be custom instruction files that you just want Copilot code review to look at, or that you just want the coding agent to look at. So there's a lot of opportunity for kind of customization and granularity that you can get with this simple construct of using your custom instruction files. And so that's just one example. The other thing that I wanted to kind of chat about is using custom agents. And so if we have, let's see, I think that, okay, yeah. So let's take a look at this custom agent that I've created, which is an accessibility agent. And we're going to see what this kind of looks like in action. But again, it kind of follows the same top-level structure. It has a description. So this is an expert assistant for web accessibility. And you can configure certain tools, different MCP servers that it might want to have access to, and the different tools that it wants to call. And then again, you can kind of give it the structure of what it is and kind of what your expertise is, and you can help ground it in the context and in the approach. And this is, again, is all just described as a simple markdown file. So a ton of kind of capability and benefit in a very simple construct. And what that will look like is, since I have that accessibility agent, we'll pop back over to my repo for a second. Let's go back to the pull request. We'll come and check on Copilot's progress again in just a minute, but we'll go back here. And actually, I don't even need to navigate to the code tab. But within the GitHub UI, and I'll make this a little bit bigger, you have the ability, you have this agents panel. And a couple important things here. One, you can see all of the recent sessions that I have for across various agents that are happening. So we see kind of our redirect issue on the Help Center page. That's the one that's currently in progress. But I have a couple of other ones. What's nice, I could pop back into any of those sessions to, again, see what happened, what Copilot's thinking was. This is important from kind of a just auditability and governance perspective. Also, as an org owner, you can see all of the agent sessions that are occurring within your organization and pop into them. So again, that's helpful from just a kind of security perspective. But what I can do is I can select from my list of agents my custom agent here. So I'm using the accessibility agent. I still want to target this repository. I could go to other repositories. And I'm going to give it a prompt that says something like, ensure this repo is adhering to accessibility guidelines and requirements. And I'll go ahead and fire that off. And what that is going to do is that's going to use that custom agent. But custom agents fundamentally work in conjunction with Copilot coding agent. So this is going to spin up another session, another task that Copilot is going to work on. But it's within a very well-defined and scoped parameter. This is a specific task. And so what's nice here is anytime you have tasks that you're finding yourself you're doing over and over again, create a custom agent for that. You can see some of the other examples that I had here for custom agents. Let's just start a new session. And you can see, I have a compliance bot. I have a documentation specialist. Like, there's a lot of different custom agents that you can create. And speaking of, if you're like, what are some other good ideas for agents that you might want to create? I don't know if you all are aware of this awesome repo called Awesome Copilot, but this is a great resource that you could go and look at to get ideas for what are some other good examples for these customizations that you can take with Copilot. So you can see we have examples for custom prompts here, for custom instructions files, for custom agents. And so you can go in here, and I bet there is an accessibility, look, there's an accessibility agent right there. So this is really good to kind of see what are these custom agents if you're looking to get some inspiration for other agents that you might want to pull into your workflow, an API architect agent, an Azure specialist. Like, there's a lot in here. So definitely recommend that you go and check out the Awesome Copilot repo. It's open and public and just a collection of good examples and patterns that you can use for inspiration. So now I'm going to pop back over to our PowerPoint for just a minute. So we just talked about custom agents. And so these are specialized agents, again, defined in Markdown files. But if you have specific things that you find yourself over and over, like SEO optimization is another great example of where you would want to use a custom agent. Because then you can really just point that agent at a task at your repository and say, hey, go make sure that we're adhering to these guidelines. Again, that's the type of stuff that developers hate working on. So if you can avoid developers working on that and offload it to an agent, do so. That is the kind of toil that we are eliminating. If we go back to those DevOps principles, it was all about reducing the waste and that toil that developers hated working on. And so this is another example of what that looks like in this AI era. And so we saw this kind of briefly, but I would say in this world where we are starting to see lots of agents that have multiple sessions that are working on different things, all of a sudden, while that's very exciting that we can leverage these tools to do all those things, it also creates a little bit of sprawl. And if you're kind of in like the administrative or org owner role, that can make you a little nervous of how do we have visibility into everything that's running? Who kicked off what session? What agent is running, what task? And so whatever tool you are using, have it be a tool that gives you visibility into all of the different agent sessions, because having visibility into this, being able to have some kind of auditability is really important, and just from the developer perspective, to be able to manage all of your sessions is super helpful. One thing, kind of a new improvement that we've brought to Copilot and Coding Agent is, as we've seen, Copilot kind of has its session. You can actually now pop into that session and do live steering. Previously, you had to wait for its work to complete if you changed your mind and the button needed to be pink and not blue. Now you can actually do live steering in the session for Copilot, and you can make that quick decision. It'll take that in for feedback and adjust accordingly. So the ability to kind of manage your sessions and then pop into your sessions and kind of steer is an important capability. Lastly, some of the tools that we kind of recommend you use. MCP, this is, it's called kind of the USB-C for AI. It's kind of the universal connector that allows you to bring in context from external systems to provide to the LLM, honestly. Now, I would say this is still a little bit of uncharted territory. We at GitHub, we first started thinking about how to integrate, again, pulling in data from external systems to provide to Copilot to make it more effective, to bring your context from your organization into the chat, to make the responses that you're getting more tailored to your organization. And we first went on this journey and started with something that we called extensions. And that was about 4 months before then Anthropic announced MCP. And everyone quickly was like, okay, MCP is the way. And so, we also kind of adopted that and have, support for MCP servers and have an MCP server registry and all of that goodness within the Copilot ecosystem. And then I don't know if anyone caught about 3 weeks ago, Anthropic released something called Skills. And so that might be a new construct. So I would say, MCP is still a little bit of not unproven technology, but there's still a lot of question marks with it. I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions for how we're going to do this in kind of a standardized way. So we'll see kind of where all this shakes out. For now, it's MCP. It might look a little different in 6 months. But for now, this is a really good kind of path, and there is a lot of adoption around using MCP as the way to pull additional data into your systems. But it is important to have some governance in place, because these are you're giving tools access to your secure development environments. There's a lot of information that they can access, and so you want to make sure that you're doing that in a thoughtful and mindful way. You want to make sure that they're able to meet compliance standards, and that you're kind of balancing, the productivity that you want to get with also being sensitive to the information that's also being shared with these tools. And so some of the kind of best practices that you can deploy is you can use a registry-based allow list. You should always use OAuth if you can. You want to be able to define and control which MCP servers developers are using. You don't just want it to be like wild, wild west, whatever tool developer kind of sees fit for that purpose. You want to have a little bit more control over that. You want to block kind of any unapproved usage that you haven't specifically said, like, yes, it's okay to use this particular tool. And then, of course, always communicate that well to developers, provide clear policy messaging. And one other just kind of piece from the control aspect within kind of this AI world is the ability to audit this activity. And so specifically with Copilot, we've recently made some improvements to our audit log for all of these things that are kicking off and the ways that you're using Copilot. So now you're able to understand who is the kind of user that initiated a request, what is the Copilot interaction, if it's coding agent versus code review that performs the action, and all of this is auditable via the audit log. So again, giving you a little bit more control, because you can't go fast without the proper guardrails in place. And so this is just one example of one of those guardrails. Okay, so if we think about what is the kind of the whole DevOps pipeline look like in this AI world today. In yesteryear, this is kind of what your old lifecycle would look like. You would have an idea that is born, you would have a number of developers that are working on it, the idea would be logged, a ticket would be created to track that work, you would assign that ticket to a developer or team member. There would need to be clarification that would happen. Sometimes context could get lost. A developer goes on vacation, you're having to kick it over to another developer. A PR is initially opened, reviewed, more feedback is given, more work continues, you iterate. Finally, maybe you do some security checks, kind of get those taken care of, and then you can approve it and merge it. Sometimes, hopefully not, but sometimes then vulnerabilities can even be found in production after things have been merged, and then you gotta kind of kick that back and address it from the beginning. But this is what the kind of the old life cycle looked like, and this could range anywhere from weeks to months. And so if you were really a fast-moving organization that had really good deployment pipelines in place, this could maybe be on the magnitude of weeks, but more likely probably in the months time frame. Well, today it looks a little different, and in terms of who's involved is going to look a little bit different. So the new life cycle is that yes, ideas will still be born, and that is where human creativity will never cease to be necessary. And then you're going to have some brainstorming that needs to happen. There's going to need to be a human that approves, yes, this is the plan, this is the next right thing that we need to work on. You're going to do some speccing. What should this thing look like? You're going to need human approval for that as well. You can see that we have a couple of humans, but then we have a whole lot of robots. That is to signify that could be GitHub Copilot, that could be Cursor, that could be Cloud Code, that could be your tool du jour your tool of choice du jour. Anyway, your tool of choice. And so, I mentioned earlier that developers are not going away. Developers are absolutely still in the loop. But I will acknowledge that the role of the developer, really everyone's responsibilities, is really starting to evolve and change a bit. And so I was, talking with some colleagues, and we were talking about, this idea of speccing and how important that has become in today's day and age. When you're handing over an issue to something like Copilot Coding Agent, your mileage will vary substantially based on how well documented that issue is, how specific you are in terms of what expected output you expect to see, the test coverage that needs to be required, any amount of detail that you can put in that issue is the more detail, the better. And so speccing is going to be becoming more and more important. So developers are going to start becoming better at writing specs, PMs are going to become a little bit more technical and more proficient and maybe a little less reliant on developers. Now a PM could have maybe 3 different ideas for what a front end could look like. And they have these designs captured in Figma. Well, they could work and use the Figma MCP server and GitHub Copilot, and they could create 3 different front end prototypes. They don't have to go to the developer and say, hey, can you wire up 3 different of these apps so that we can decide which one looks best? Now they're going to be able to do that on their own. And so everyone's role is going to evolve a little bit. And I mentioned that I don't think we're that far off from developers seeing that 90% of the code being written is likely being written by agents. And so they're going to be more responsible for understanding what does this software need to look like? What does this architecture need to look like? What are the specs and the acceptance criteria that's going to be part of this project? And I was listening to a talk by Rendon Burns, who's one of the co-founders or one of the original contributors to the Kubernetes project. And he was talking about layers of abstraction. And he said, if you write code in C#, you're 2 layers of abstraction away from the computer that's actually running that code. Because C# compiles down to the intermediate language, and then that compiles down to assembly. And so from the developer perspective, you're not actually seeing the code that's getting executed, that's getting run, because we have abstraction layers in between us, right? And so similarly, we're now just creating another level of abstraction that developers are going to kind of benefit from, because they're going to be more responsible for architecting the entire system, how the agents are going to coordinate with each other. But the actual execution, the atomic unit of execution, is going to happen with the agent. That's just the reality of the world that we're living in. And so we will see that, more and more we're going to rely on the robots to take care of this process for us. But that's okay, because again, humans aren't going anywhere. Just the nature of the responsibilities is changing slightly. And so what we see here, though, is after we've kind of brainstormed and spec'd, what is it that we need to build? We're going to do some coding. We're going to do lots of coding. We're going to iterate. We might have found a bug as part of that process of that code being generated. You want to have as much automation as possible in place so that it doesn't slow down, again, kind of become the bottleneck in the overall process. Remember, we're trying to optimize the ease of software being able to flow through the system with ease. And so what we're looking at is things in there. You can see that it says autofix, and that's a Copilot capability that is able to identify if there's a security vulnerability that's been detected, understands what that security vulnerability is, and then can actually suggest a fix to remediate that process. So I'll show you what this looks like within the PR workflow and how you can use that. But again, if we can rely on agents to help remove these blockers and not get hung up when we do run into anything, that's going to be key. Because while we do have to ensure that the software that is getting delivered is secure, if we can automate how that is detected and then remediated, all the better, right? Put the guardrails in place, but let them be handled by these agents to help you move fast. Then, kind of continuing down the process, we're going to be able to do code review. That also can be handled in agentic fashion these days, all the way to kind of we're ready to deploy. Again, that's going to need human approval, of course, just to make sure that everything that's generated looks good, designs as intended, that is behaving as designed, and that everything is secure and adhering to all standards and compliance requirements. So, I mentioned as part of that a couple of things. First thing, Copilot code review. This allows you to do kind of an agentic code review. And this is something that you can set up as a rule set on your repository so that every PR that gets created leverages Copilot code review. You can even configure it so that it can run security tools or linters, and you can have a number of things. In fact, you can even, we'll see configuring a linter. But so that you can have a code review do a first pass. Because oftentimes we see that that's where one of the longest wait times occurs, is waiting for a human code review to occur. And so if you can at least take a first pass from an agent, that's an incredible benefit to developers to, again, not slow down the process, to keep things moving. You can catch things earlier, developers can fix it. That's less manual, or that's less requirement on the human developer that will ultimately come in, and you can help to reduce the overall load of what they're reviewing when they do step into the process. So you can do Copilot code review. Again, you can do that in an automated way. You can also do Copilot autofix. This is what I described, where if a security vulnerability is detected, now you're able to kind of have the developer spend less time fixing those vulnerabilities if you can offload it to an agent. So this is something that Copilot coding agent can now do. It has security capabilities so that it can do auto fixes and can leverage our static analysis tool, CodeQL, under the hood. And you're able to, again, kind of have an agent to help you with this process. So, and when you're leveraging AutoFix, when you're doing this kind of at scale, you're really able to see, faster fixes that occur within the pull request. So catching these things, of course, before they make it to production, you want to catch it in the developer workflow. In the GitHub world, we really consider that the PR. This is the time and place to catch these vulnerabilities and to remediate them before it moves any further. You're able to see kind of 7x faster fixes for things like cross-site scripting, 12x faster fixes for things like SQL injection. These are very common patterns that LLMs have gotten very good at detecting and knowing what is the canonical fix in order to remediate that vulnerability. So again, that's low-hanging fruit that we can just offload to an agent so that your developers don't really have to worry about it. Of course, they'll be able to review the fix and to make sure that it looks good. Of course, you're still going to have all of your testing framework there to make sure that everything is still green and passing, and so nothing, everything is still being reviewed and following best secure practices. But you're leveraging an agent, not having to take developer time to actually implement these fixes. So pretty meaningful. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like. So if I go back to my repository, we can actually see here. I'm going to go back to another pull request that I have, not the one that Copilot just opened, the one that I had opened earlier today, and we can look at what this looks like. Again, we kind of see the PR as the place that a lot of these processes should occur, because this is where developers are already kind of used to getting feedback. They're still kind of actively working, but this is where code scanning gets run, and any vulnerabilities that are detected are alerted and notified and annotated within the PR. So we can see that we have a number of different actions that are being run. We're doing a dependency review to make sure none of our packages have vulnerabilities in them. We're also doing a CI results summary. And then you can see here that we have this bot, GitHub Advanced Security bot, and it's calling out a specific file, and we'll see here that we actually have an alert from CodeQL. Again, that's the technology we're using under the hood to do static analysis scanning, and that we have a vulnerability for missing rate limiting, and that Copilot has a suggested autofix. So it gives you a high-level description of what the problem is and what the fix needs to be, and then giving you a summary of the changes that are required. And then it actually gives you that suggested fix right in kind of this diff view. Similarly, you'd be making changes to 2 files. And so you can, commit right from here. You can also, open this in your IDE. It'll take you right to kind of this fix and the proposed fix from Copilot. There's a number of different things number of actions that you can take. Similarly, so we have a lot of issues in this PR. No surprise, I wrote it. And so we can see that we have a number of vulnerabilities, but we have autofix there to help us out with those vulnerabilities. And so that's ultimately what that looks like. So that's super helpful that I'm alerted of that. If I wasn't within the PR, if the code scanning ran kind of out of bounds and it wasn't new code that was being checked in that had code scanning running on it, and I pop over to my security tab, and I had just security results just in general. So here we have a code injection critical vulnerability. This is interesting because this is actually looking at our actions workflows, and we have potential code injection in the parameters that we're passing into our workflow because it could be controlled by an external user. And so what this is now saying is that using user-controlled input and actions could lead to code injection. It gives us more information here, which is super handy. But what I'm able to do is I'm also able to generate a fix for this vulnerability. So again, kind of in terms of reducing cognitive load from the developer, the ability to do this is super impactful. But more importantly, what I was more trying to show was that you have the ability to kind of catch these things in the PR in an automated fashion. Now you also have the ability to assign, if there are vulnerabilities are detected, you can assign those directly to Copilot coding agent to take care of. So that's another way that you can kind of offload to the agents. The other thing that I wanted to show you, I mentioned we talked about code review, and so I just wanted to pop into my repo settings, go down to Copilot, and to do code review, and to show you kind of what that looks like. So we have a rule set that has been set up that leverages code review. So I'm going to pop into this rule set. And this is really how you protect whether you want it. You can create a rule set for a branch, a tag, a release. There's a number of different ways and interactions that you can apply a rule set to. And you can, specify which repositories you're trying to target, which branches you're trying to target, and then you can see some of the rules that we have in place to protect this branch. We require that pull requests occur before merging. We require workflows to pass before merging. We require code scanning results. We require code quality results. Now we have the ability to do code quality with an agent, a Copilot agent. But you can also request the Copilot do a code review. And so it could be on, this will just be on every PR that is created. You could also then optionally select or elect to have it on any new pushes or also on draft pull requests. So a little bit of choice there. And then you can also manage which static analysis tools Copilot will use in its code review. And so CodeQL is selected by default, but then you can also select to include linters here. So there's a lot that we're starting to offload as part of the code review process to, again, catch these issues before, as early as possible, to give that feedback to the developer as soon as possible. So again, we're not trying to slow things down later on in the process. We're trying to catch them much further along. And so, yeah, I think that's all that I wanted to show you with code review, just that this is definitely something of best practice that we recommend, that you can have this occur on every PR that is created on GitHub. And so this is something that I would definitely recommend that you all look into. All right, so we're wrapping up here. We have about 5 minutes left. I was talking earlier that we're thinking about the front end of the funnel, and that's where we have no problem today. We have so many tools that are available to us that are helping developers generate code before this time, speeds that we've never seen before. But now we need to focus on that other half of the pipeline, which is all about verification and validation, making sure that this code is secure and that we're comfortable bringing it into our production environment. And so just from kind of a TLDR for some of the things that we talked about, you obviously want to have your validation or your security validation tools. Security has become more important than ever in this era of generative AI. You also should leverage Copilot code review because there's so much that you can tailor within that process. You can pass it custom instructions files. You can require that it runs on every PR. You can have it run security tools like static analysis or linters, and you can have those things occur automatically at the PR level as part of the code review before a human ever even gets involved. And then you can also use our new code quality agent, which will give you a score for things like readability, maintainability, any quality issues that are surfaced, it'll surface those for you. You can have a developer look at those. You can ask Copilot coding agent to generate a fix for those quality issues that are surfaced. So there's a lot that can help you, tools that are already available that you can realize today to help you stay secure in this space. All right, so in sum, here's some of my recommendations and calls to action for you all to do today. Invest in the primitives. I've talked a lot about this, but use those custom instruction files because they are you can be so specific and so granular and so tailored into what you are trying to do at different processes, whether that's code generation or code review. Leverage those custom instruction files. Every repository should have one. I'm really going to lean into that. Every repository should have one. Second, whether it's MCP today. If this changes in the future, we'll see. But leverage the tools that allow you to pull context in from other systems to be more effective in using your LLMs. Secondly, leverage the agents. The agents are what help you automate away the toil. It's, again, coming back to those DevOps principles. Remove toil, remove those bottlenecks. The agents are the tools that can help you do that. Then, leverage the processes. So do the code review. Have automated verification and validation. That's the part of the funnel that we're really trying to focus on right now. So have those processes that can help you validate and verify that the code is good to go. And then lastly, don't forget about the fundamentals. Again, AI does not change any of the core of DevOps. So having code scans, using linters, doing code reviews, having code owners, all of that, small PRs, frequent check-ins, none of that goes away. Those things, like, we're doubling down on the importance of those things in this AI era. So definitely don't lose track of the fundamentals. And if you're not doing these things well today, AI is going to bite you. So focus on doing those things really well first. And so again, just a kind of friendly reminder, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about, we are leveraging Copilot Coding Agent internally, and it's really driving huge impacts in terms of our backlog and addressing our tech debt. But really, don't take it from me, because I'm in sales. So, but you should take it from Brittany. And this was a talk. I know it's maybe not standard to pitch someone else's talk when you're giving a talk, but Brittany stood up at GitHub Universe, which is about 5 weeks ago, and she said, I'm not in marketing, and I'm not in sales. I'm an engineer at GitHub. I don't even work on Copilot. I work in billing. And she said, I'm just here to talk to you about how excited I am, how we're using Copilot Coding Agent to tackle tech debt on our team. And she gives really good examples of the tech debt that they're addressing, the ways to be most effective with Copilot Coding Agent, and it's just an overall delightful talk. So there's a QR code there. Highly recommend that you go check out Brittany's talk, because she's kind of the real world experience that can speak to using these things in a production system. And that's all that I have for you. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you all being here. Hope you have a fabulous rest of your conference. Tomorrow's Friday. Yay. Thanks, guys.